Please subscribe. Chen Wei had heard about the February 28 incident all her life. Her parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents had all lived through it, and the legacy of that time had shaped her family's experience in Taiwan for generations. Her father had been a political dissident during the White Terror, and he had spent years in prison for his beliefs. Chen Wei had grown up hearing stories about the KMT's brutal crackdown on dissent and the thousands of innocent people who had been killed. Despite this, Chen Wei had always felt somewhat disconnected from the events of the past. She had grown up in a different era, one where Taiwan was a thriving democracy, and the country's struggles with its identity were different from those of previous generations. But all that changed when she started studying history in college. Chen Wei was shocked by the details she learned about the February 28 incident. The arbitrary seizure of private property, the economic mismanagement, and the exclusion from political participation were just the tip of the iceberg. The KMT's response to the protests had been brutal, with soldiers firing on unarmed civilians and the government engaging in widespread persecution of political dissidents. The fact that the incident was considered too taboo to be discussed for decades only added to the tragedy. Chen Wei became obsessed with learning more about the incident. She spent countless hours in the library, poring over old books and documents, and interviewing family members and others who had lived through that time. She even traveled to Taipei to visit the 228 Peace Memorial Park and the National 228 Memorial Museum, where she felt a deep sense of connection to the victims and their families. As she delved deeper into the history of the incident, Chen Wei began to understand why it was so important. It was not just a tragedy that had affected her family and her country, it was a critical moment in Taiwan's modern history, a turning point that had helped shape the nation's identity and fuel the independence movement. And it was a reminder of the importance of democracy, human rights, and the need to remain vigilant against those who would seek to suppress them. Chen Wei's studies culminated in her senior thesis, a detailed analysis of the February 28 incident and its aftermath. She presented her findings to her professors and classmates, and her work was praised for its insight and thoroughness. But the real reward came when she shared her work with her family. Her father, who had been skeptical of her studies at first, was deeply moved by her dedication and passion for the subject. And her grandmother, who had lost her husband during the crackdown, thanked Chen Wei for helping to keep his memory alive. For Chen Wei, the February 28 incident had gone from a distant historical event to a personal connection to her family's past and Taiwan's future. She was proud to have played a small part in preserving the memory of those who had suffered and died during that dark time and to help ensure that such atrocities would never be repeated. Among those who were affected by the February 28 incident was the family of Li Chengxiang. Li's father, a prominent lawyer and politician, was arrested and executed during the White Terror period that followed the uprising. Growing up, Li was aware of his father's fate, but his mother never spoke about the events that led to his death. As Li grew older, he became increasingly interested in the history of Taiwan and the February 28 incident in particular. He read books, watched documentaries, and visited the various memorials and museums dedicated to the victims of the massacre. He became convinced that the incident was a pivotal moment in Taiwan's history, one that had been ignored and suppressed for far too long. Li decided to take action. He organized a group of like-minded individuals and began campaigning for greater recognition of the February 28 incident. They wrote letters to politicians, organized protests and rallies, and spoke out in public forums. They urged the government to take responsibility for the massacre and to provide compensation to the families of the victims. Their efforts paid off. In 1995, President Li Teng-hui publicly acknowledged the incident for the first time, and it became a national holiday called Peace Memorial Day. Memorials and museums were built, and the government established a commission to investigate the massacre and provide compensation to the families of the victims. For Li Chengxiang, it was a bittersweet victory. While he was pleased to see the incident finally receiving the recognition it deserved, he could not help but feel the pain of his father's loss all over again. He knew that no amount of compensation could bring his father back or erase the trauma that his family had endured. Nevertheless, Li continued to be a vocal advocate for justice and accountability. He believed that the only way to move forward was to confront the past and acknowledge the mistakes that had been made. He hoped that by doing so, Taiwan could finally heal and move forward as a united and democratic nation. Please like, comment, and subscribe.